Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andreea Groenendijk-Deveau, and I'm the CEO and Editor-in-Chief of Workplace Today, a magazine championing companies and individuals looking to put equality, diversity, and inclusion, as well as flexibility and employee well-being at the core of their strategies. We are actively helping businesses around the world redefine the new workplace, be more flexible, engage with their employees, and be truly nimble in adapting to the new reality. You can find us at workplacetoday.co.uk. I have with me today two great speakers, Steve Schatz, CEO of Astriid, and Toni Georgieva, HR expert. But before I go on to them, kind reminder that we have an option at the bottom of your screen for you to ask questions. So please do so and introduce yourselves when you do. So Steve Schatz, CEO of Astriid, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Astriid.
Sure. So thank you, Andrea. Lovely to be here. Lovely to be here for the first of the Workplace Today webinars as well. Astriid is a charity, a UK registered charity that's been set up to help people with long-term health conditions to get back to work. Not just any work, we want them to connect to meaningful work. So in essence, we have two communities of people on our platform. We have a community of people who've got long-term health conditions. That might be a cancer, an ME, an MS, it might be rheumatoid arthritis, it might be a chronic hearing or sight issue. But equally, it's people with physical disability, people with mental illness as well, and all of the carers that care for that community. So we reckon about 11 million people in what we call the invisible talent pool. As chief executive, my job is to try and connect them with jobs and roles, volunteer as well as paid jobs that business creates specifically for them. Not every business requires people to be full-time. Not every business requires them to have a bum on a seat 9 to 5 on Monday to Friday. What we look to do is try and make connections between the talent those people represent and the businesses that need their help.
Thank you, Steve. Toni Georgieva, HR expert, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, thank you, Andrea, for the invite as well. I'm Toni. My HR expertise comes from working with typically startups and small companies, so that's tech, fintech, and recruitment companies as well. I have passion for high growth environments, and obviously this is an interesting situation to be in right now. But given that typically startups have a fastly changing environments, this is something that we can always look forward, and it's quite an interesting opportunity to be able to talk to you, to Steve, and to your audience today about my experience.
Well, wonderful to have both of you. Today's topic is the new normal. In this new normal, companies are having to be nimble and quickly adapt their approach to HR and general business strategies, or risk having to close their doors. Working remotely, part-time, or odd hours would have been a luxury 6 months ago. Now it pretty much defines today's workplace, and the trend may be here to stay. This is something we might want to try and figure out today. So how can both companies and people adapt? So my first question, I'll go to Steve for that, is what are the things defining the new workplace at the moment? What are the things that you've seen in your work with companies?
I think one of the things that's absolutely here to stay, Andrea, is this whole focus and awareness of mental health issues. I think there's always been conversation about it, but perhaps now for the first time, there's also an acceptance of it by corporates as well. I would have been doing this job with Astriid for about 2.5 years, and it wouldn't necessarily have come up that often in conversation with boards or with C-suite executives that they're focused on mental health support. But I saw some research the other day, research done across some large companies, Shell, Marks and Spencer's, John Lewis, BT, Centrica were amongst them, which said that 79% of those companies have now seen an increase in requests for mental health support, and 88% of them have now got mental health issues and how to address them on the board. Or at the board. So it's big implications for HR and management, I think. So in terms of things that need to change, I think there needs to be a recognition, an understanding, and then a will to do something about it as well. It probably hasn't come as a huge surprise to employees that this has become a big issue. We've known this stat of 1 in 4 of us likely to experience some sort of mental health issue at some point in our working life. We've known about that for a while. It's the fact that companies have woken up to it. In terms of what needs to change, I think that where a focus in the past has been missing is in training. I think a really critical community are the line managers who are responsible for training, the middle managers, if you like, who need to receive some help in guidance on how to support people who are going through issues. And I think recruitment is one of those areas that needs to change. Recruitment is absolutely flat at the moment. Recruitment agents, most of their people would appear to be on furlough, it seems, but their ability to flex and change their business model will be really critical. I think they will need to adapt to that new normal very quickly. And the other thing that we'll need to change is really businesses' approach to flexible and remote working. There are all sorts of stats about how many people are quite happy with the work we've got today and the change that's been made. Shift patterns will have to change. Flexible working, remote working will become part of the norm as well. So I think there's a number of things that will change, but amongst those, I would say, yes, recruitment, the way people work, training, and particularly mental health and attitudes to mental health will be the biggest ones.
So one of the big takeaways is mental health has become top of mind for a lot of people. I mean, from all the discussions I've had, definitely with people for the magazine, there's no such thing as being ashamed to say you have a problem, or at least companies have an approach where they welcome employees that essentially say, we do have a problem, we need support. Companies are becoming more and more open to that. Obviously, there's no 180 change overnight, but the fact that we're having this conversation, I think, is quite good. Toni, same question to you. How do you define today's workplace?
So I would say it's very much pretty aligned to what Steve was saying. What I could add as well is, actually I'll put it as a top of my list, is embracing flexibility. We do have to make sure that we have sort of a scenario planning approach to how we go about on a business level, and making sure that we build contingency plans. It's really important for me to, wherever I can impact the level of flexibility we have, is that we do it. As something like 11% of all the jobs advertised in the UK even mention flexible working. So this is something that I think would have to be a little bit more prominent right now, and obviously has been, but I'm not sure whether this is something that it would stay. And if I have to advise leadership, I will definitely make sure that this happens in the companies that we advise as well. So people now measured more on the output rather than the hours they input, which is I guess the situation for many forward-thinking companies, but a lot of people were put into that situation right now where they had to adjust to that as well. So it's important to communicate a lot clearer right now in terms of the phases that we go through, and sometimes communicating that we may need to backtrack and go back to a phase, recalibrate, or just go through a different route as well. And at the same time, mentioning well-being and mental health as well is really, really important, and it should definitely be on the HR roadmap in terms of what they're moving forward. And we're all facing kind of the same anxieties about, first of all, going into home working environment, then returning to work, the job security, health and safety in the workplace, and there's a lot that needs to be covered, and it will remain on our in the discussions that we have. So it's more about all of these kind of encompassing topics, and mainly about creating a culture that allows for these conversations to happen. Building up and maintaining the employee morale is also quite important. So there is a lot there. So we can just break it down later on and go into these in a little bit more detail, but there is a lot right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are living in unprecedented times. So the first step is to talk about it and understand what some of the problems are. In terms of solutions, it might take a while, but and I'll stay with you for this one, Toni. You mentioned that you have a lot of experience in the startup environment, which is famously more nimble than the big corporates. So they are more likely to be able to adapt quite quickly. In what you've seen, how can companies and individuals quickly adapt to this new normal? What are perhaps 2-3 steps that they can take to essentially make sure they continue working, that their employees are safe? So you mentioned talking about the problems. Are there any other things that you can think of that we can tell people that they can learn from some of the things you've experienced in terms of introducing it into their own companies and applying it tomorrow?
I just want to start by saying there's a caveat that I wouldn't in no shape or form kind of underestimate how important it is to to make sure that we go through this change with people together and not just impose a change management process that doesn't work for anyone. Everyone will react to this differently. So for me, it's important to understand that it's not just a shift from meetings in face-to-face meetings to Zoom meetings, and that's it. That's the whole process. We're done. We've done it. We've equipped everyone with the technology. We've given everyone enough equipment to be able to continue to do their work. This is kind of the basis that we can have, and it's good. But at the same time, let's not underestimate the impact this would have on people and their work-life balance, on the quality of the work they output. So for me, it'd be really important to, it's a very long process, it's not a quick win, to make sure that the skills and capabilities of managers we have on site, so sort of the front line, are what we need at the time, or if not, then we can amplify them and train them up to make sure that they have the correct, well, not the correct, but the one-to-ones, the effective ones, to make sure that they separate the KPIs and goal-oriented discussions to the ones where they just ask, how are you today? What are the obstacles? What barriers can I remove in terms of you making sure, or removing any anxieties about either returning to work or choosing to stay and working from home for the foreseeable future, if that's possible, of course, in the company. So to me, it would be, that's where I would start. I think this is the point where it's most crucial, and the most impact would come from training up and educating managers to leverage on the existing skills, or train them up to work a little bit more on their soft skills. So that's my starting point. The next one will be really, really strong communication, plan and strategy that encompasses and is really tied in with employees' well-being and mental health. So we did have internal and external training as well, focusing on mental health while in isolation, because it's a great change. And then it's important to understand that we as a company, I say we, but it's basically the company, we are listening to actionable feedback through surveys, through one-to-one conversations, through any other avenue that you can create for employees to share actionable feedback and insight. This is really valuable insight, and ensure that through this feedback there are some changes. And that is, again, really, really clearly communicated to the people and saying, this is what we've done so far. We wanted your opinion. This is how we think we're going to go next. These are, let's say, the contingency plans we have in place, depending on how our business would develop. Let's not forget that some businesses are thriving out there, so they have to deal with that as well. So there is a lot more workload, and it's really important for the whole company to understand what are our plans, what are those dependent on, how is this affecting me as an employee, and what can I do to remove any obstacles in my way. At the same time, it's really important for me to finally mention that it's quite important to remain as close to your employees as possible. I'm not sure what the audience's situation is right now, but I'm sure there's a lot of people in different countries with different legal frameworks, with different health and safety policies. So that all has to be brought at the forefront, so everyone knows that they're cared for and valued as well.
Thank you so much. Before I go to Steve, there is a Q&A section at the bottom if anybody wants to ask any questions. Steve, you mentioned remote working, which has been one of the main things that describes this new normal. And you have a lot of experience through your work with Astriid when it comes to remote working, because so many of Astriid's candidates do work from home. They need to, so it's been quite difficult for them for the longest time to find employment, because companies were not really willing to create such positions, maybe because they felt like supervision might be difficult, maybe because it just wasn't the way things were being done. But now it is how things are being done. So how can companies quickly integrate remote working into their strategies and into their normal?
Well, I think the first place is obviously recruitment. You're looking to broaden and significantly broaden the way in which you bring people into your organization. I lost count of the number of companies that would have said to us in the journey we've had with Astriid, that's a really good idea, pat on the head, thanks for doing it, but you know what, it doesn't really work for us. It doesn't work for us because we're not a company who can adopt flexible working, or we're on a journey to doing it, and by 2025, we expect to have 25% of our people with remote working opportunities. And it was frustrating then and annoying then to hear that being stated, because you knew full well that with a little bit of application, with a little bit of open-mindedness, then there could be a change to the way things were done. And recruitment is the most obvious place to start with that. So our case for change is to say, look, if you open your mind, if you think about the way in which you can bring people in, it could be on a job share basis, it could be on a part-time basis, on a contract basis, then there are more than 11 million people out there who have managed a health condition or are managing a health condition of working age, or are looking after someone with a health condition, who are an opportunity for you to expand your workforce significantly, and to do so in a very cost-effective way. You're bringing people into your organization on a part-time basis. With remote working, you don't need to pay for them to travel in or to sit in your office. You can have them working from home, and you can use and rely upon the skills and experiences that they've developed by being somebody who's managed that condition for some time. So all the businesses that are still in business post-COVID will have got used to the idea of flexible working and remote working. So I'm not expecting to hear that as an issue again from any of those organisations, because it clearly isn't, well, it never was a real issue. But the other thing I would say is just about performance. I think that what's being called for now is a significant change in the way in which Emma, darling, please.
Sorry, I'm getting the feed. I need that.
a bit of background noise. In terms of performance, is I think that now is a time for really bold and courageous decision making. To build on what Tony's just said, I think that you have to take your people with you, but what people are looking for now is real leadership, and real leadership involves a different style of management, a different style of communication, perhaps a bit less collegiate for a while, perhaps a bit less about coaching, slightly more about directive, but those managers and those leaders, for the short term at least, need to be clear about the way they want things to work. And we're suggesting that there are creative ways of you managing your workforce and managing communication such that you put people at the center of what you're doing, but doing so in a way that gives you as a businessman the best chance of success. And I think, again, as Toni touched on values and culture, one of the things that our candidates have said to us is that they've noticed something of an outpouring of kindness around this time. And that's great. Lovely to see it, lovely to hear that that's happening. So how can we become, how can we call out behavior that should not be tolerated more easily and more often? How can we embed stories of really good practice around vision, values, and culture in organizational history? How can we call those stories out in order to be able to develop a more caring and inclusive organization?
And Steve, so many times companies said, as you mentioned, great, but not for us. What do you think are the main pain points? Is it that people don't know how to manage candidates remotely? Is it that they're worried the work wouldn't get done? What could be the pain points? What could be the issues that they're worried about? And what's the solution for that?
It is about training, Andreea. It is about performance management as well. And I think it's about investing in those things that get your middle managers to better understand how to manage a remote workforce and how to use remote workers in a combination in a way that delivers a better result. But it's about performance management, isn't it? And what all businesses will want to do and increasingly need to do is to make sure they're getting as much value as they possibly can from the workforce that they've got. And I think that, again, comes down to being more creative. Yeah, the thing that our candidates who come with a diversity and inclusion tag, what they bring is innovation and creativity. They bring that in spades. And if you can bring those people into your organization, you're going to find that their life skills impact upon the people within your team. The impact on your team members will be significant. And I'd go as far as to say that I think that one of the things we've noticed is the playing field has perhaps slightly leveled up. That the playing field in terms of that equality issue, bringing people into the organization that have got a health condition, that are managing an illness, but are doing it well, those people have actually got a really good chance of now taking up roles that might previously not have been open to them. They are used to working from home. They're used to social isolation. Forget being isolated for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. Try 6 years, 8 years, 12 years. And those guys have got used to being able to manage themselves, to organize themselves around what they can and can't do. They'll hit the ground running when they come and work for your organization, an organization that now needs to reflect that there might be more situations of lockdown, there might be more situations with pandemics where you're going to need it. And I've got one particularly good example I can come back to in a moment, Andreea, but let me, I've talked enough. Let's hear from Toni as well. But one particular example that might bring that to light.
Okay, well,
to add on to that is just what you mentioned about highlighting best practice as well as kind of making sure that we are not tolerating any bad practice when it comes to this, is that let's say managers or interaction from peers with people who are working remotely, it's habits. Basically, it's just a habit that it takes time to change in terms of how we interact, and saying I will be available for this phone call or this Zoom call at 10 o'clock, and then being there on time and making sure that everything is now, obviously we've lived through it and through this experiment of whether we can all work remotely, and I think most of us have proven that we can, but it's more about changing our habits, and it takes time, and I'm 100% in agreement in what you're saying in terms of shouting a little bit more about the best practice that we're seeing right now, and making sure that these are shared amongst in terms of our network, and we can learn from each other. 100% agreed on that.
And in terms of practical solutions, could it be that we need to train people more in managing people remotely? Do we need different software to just monitor projects? What are some of the things that could be easy fixes right now?
But both of those, Andreea, both of those absolutely. But the example I was going to cite was is to do with carers. So in this country, we had January was said to be 9.1 million unpaid carers in the UK. Now, great many of those are of working age. What COVID has done is to add a further 4.5 million. Put those together, you've got 13.5 million people who've now got some sort of caring responsibility, many of whom will be of working age, and many of whom will need to work for economic reasons. What we know is that services have been withdrawn, and that's why people have found themselves in this unpaid caring role. Many carers already live in poverty or near to poverty anyway. The caring allowance is £67 a week. So these people who've become pillars of our care-giving society now really need help. And there's lots of calls for government to do something about it and to pour more money into that world. And, you know, of course I echo that. And I think it's really important that the government does recognise the important role that these people play and helps to support them. But there's a really good example and an illustration of where employers can play a part as well. If you think about the life of a carer, it's typically you're at home, you can't leave home because you're caring for somebody. You're at home, you can't leave, you have to do your work from home. You can't really do much outside of your caring responsibility until about 9 o'clock. There's getting up, there's washing, dressing, feeding, and getting comfortable. But between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock, you've got a period of time where potentially your requirement is very limited. Lunchtime, a couple of hours, you've got the same thing again. There might be a meal to be served. There's got some caring responsibilities to deliver. But again, about 2 o'clock through till perhaps about 5 o'clock, you've got a period of time where, again, because the person you're caring for is settled, is comfortable, may even be asleep, maybe on medication, then you've got time again. And if you think about it, probably in the evening as well, you've even got a slot that might be an hour or two long, sometime after 7 o'clock. Now add those up and that becomes an 8 or 9 hour day. Now, if we were being creative and if you were an organization that had a customer care center, you were operating a call center business, why would you not have a think about how you could create a virtual call center where you create shift patterns and roles and managers who can manage people in that remote way to be able to work to those sorts of shift patterns? And at a stroke, if you think about the number of people involved in our customer care sector, a number of those roles could shift to becoming virtual call centers, and we could deploy this enormous number of people who, let's not forget, they've got loads of experience. They're not as if they've only ever done a caring job. They're now in a caring job because of the situation they find themselves in. They've got business skills and experiences as well. But bring them back to work, create virtual call centers, create that across a new shift pattern, which is quite simply new and different to what we've had before. I've heard businesses say that the talent pool in a certain location is exhausted. They can't find anybody else to do the call center jobs that they've got in certain locations. My answer to that is that's rubbish. There are lots and lots of people, you just need to know where to look for them. And I think there's a really good example of how a problem, social problem of people taking on care responsibilities in poverty, not being able to work, can be solved by business thinking more practically about it.
to add on to that, if you manage to absolutely shift our way around thinking that performance management and how we're measuring output rather than the hours that are input into work, depending on the work, of course. As you mentioned, Steve, it's really important that those 3 or 4 hours could be could produce output that is absolutely fine and enough, and just making sure that we can measure that. It will be important, and that is one way to be creative. Well, 9 to 5 obviously doesn't work for anyone regardless, and that's why it's a little bit easy in the startup work where if you do your job, if you do it in 2 hours, 3 hours, or 8 hours, it doesn't matter as long as it gets down to the quality level that is needed. So this could be one way around it for sure.
So in other words, 9 to 5 is a nice old movie, and it should probably stay in the past.
It wasn't fit for purpose then, and it still isn't fit for purpose now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is a great time to redefine one's strategies, HR strategies, business strategies. So my next question is, what should companies put at the core of what they do moving forward? Shall I start with Toni?
Sure, I would obviously always have the HR lenses, and my answer would be just to be very people-centric right now, but through data. So what I have found myself and my colleagues as well, my peers, is that we rely a lot more on data in the past 5 to 6 months than we ever did before, which is good. This is a change in a positive direction. Only through data then we can change a lot of our policies and practices, and how we evaluate human behavior, and how we track whether we're actually delivering on our employee value proposition as a company. So for me, that's what I would put at the very core of my HR strategy. And let's just say that, again, this is an opportunity for me to kind of sit back, observe, analyze the data that we have, analyze the conversations that we're having, and think how my HR strategy would change, obviously aligned to the overall business strategy, and what areas I need to change, what new things have resurfaced and need to be now a little bit, I need to put a little bit more focus on them. So for me, it will be being a lot more people-centric, especially right now, and all those decisions should be underpinned by and kind of based on the data that we collect from people.
Well, before I go to Steve with that same question, I actually have a follow-up question. When you look at this data and you analyze it and you realize you need to make changes, how quickly should you be ready to act upon the conclusions you draw? Because if you realize you need to change strategies and then it takes 2 years for you to implement that, it doesn't quite work, does it?
No, not exactly. Not especially in the environments that I've worked with before and I've been working with, which is very fast-paced and fast-moving, where you have to make decisions, you have to make business cases on why we're changing and why certain elements need to be prioritized over others, and what's more important, and can we simultaneously do both or 3 or 4 at the same time. So it's really important for me to understand what's driving my decision, and how would that impact the business and the employees and the business strategy as well, and make sure that I can act quickly as well. So there's no delay, and the impact is there, and it's not something that is just a policy or a strategy that is not acted upon. So for example, going back to what Steve said at the beginning, right now a lot of companies have shifted their HR strategy towards well-being and mental health, and how we can support employees. So this is, again, there's no time to waste here. We just have to act immediately, and it's a matter of getting it right, and making sure that employees understand why we're doing this as well. So it's crucial to make sure that you understand why you're making this decision, what is the impact, and align with everyone else in the business, because more often than not, when you have to make this quick decision making, and obviously strategy altering decisions, you have to show that there's no conflict with messages coming to the employees as well.
Brilliant. Back to you, Steve. Same question. What should companies put at the core of what they do moving forward?
I think the answer will be certainly partly about people, but I think there are probably, if I was running a business today, and I've been lucky enough to run businesses as well as now be involved in running the charity, I think that the best thing to start with is going to be to remap your landscape. One of the things that's changed for you as a business is your customers, your markets, the territories you operate in, the products you serve and you sell to them. And I think that one of the things that I would be doing would be to start to bring together the key people in the organization, or if they're not in the organization, the key people outside the organization who can help me to map the new landscape. There's a number of tools out there. There's SWOT analysis, there's pest analysis, there's exercises that you can run for your business that allows you to look at that changing landscape and those changing dynamics. I was involved in an exercise just earlier today on that same subject. So making sure you've then got a clearly defined purpose for your organization, that you've got a promise that you're making to your customers, but also to your employees as well, and an ability to then clearly articulate what your business purpose is and what you're about, what your USP is, your elevator script as they refer to it. To understand that and to be able to communicate that will be one thing, and that could well be different from what it was prior to the coronavirus crisis. But then I also think you've got to think about your values as well. What are your core values? Have you ever written those values down? Have you written down how you want your organization to run, the culture that you want within your organization, and a list of behaviors that you won't tolerate, the things that you won't do? One really good question that's often asked is if your top performer was displaying characteristics or behaviors that were not consistent with what you're setting as a company, would you keep them? Would you keep them in place? Would they stay within the organization, or would you remove them? So I think you need to write down your company purpose, you need to write down your company values, you need to link those things together, and then ensure you've got the systems and procedures and technology to allow you to deliver to that future. And then in terms of people, I think it's about talent management, isn't it? It's about saying, if I'm thinking about my business has changed. We're now heading in a slightly different direction. We're looking at different markets. We're looking at different products. We're an engineering business that used to make parts for aeroplanes. We can't make those anymore. What's our engineering business going to make parts for instead? There are lots of other requirements for engineered products. How else can we pivot our capability and develop something else? But to then identify a talent management strategy which brings the right talent into the organization to support you on that journey. And to that end, I have to say I'm a fan of the gig economy. I'm a fan of a situation where for a while I have a business that requires a project manager or a finance manager or somebody with international experience. I want to bring them in for 3 months to help me to understand that journey and that plan. Might keep them for longer. They might stay with me for longer, but bring those skills in that allow us to refocus on that new area. Pay them properly, not gig economy as in, not being paid properly, but bring skills in as you need them to redeploy down a slightly different journey and down a different track. And I think sharing all that with your team and with your customers as well is really important.
Well, we have a question that fits really well from one of our attendees. Greg says, our managers could hardly wait to start getting us back into the office instead of having all the difficulties of remote meetings and communicating. Don't you think most places will just go straight back to the old ways of working, apart from standing maybe a tiny bit further apart?
I'll ask the businesses of Leicester, Greg, what they think of that. Because what
Fair
we
point.
can't do now is make any assumptions about what will happen next. That if we think we can get away with returning to what we did before without a risk of more virus. I mean, you read the papers today, there's a new virus, there's a new thing being identified in China. Who's to say it will be a coronavirus at all? It might be a completely different pandemic that might come down the pipeline next. I think we'll find that because we've relatively quickly, relatively easily, and yes, with big economic consequences, but we've been able to adopt this locked down, stay at home, work from home culture. I think that will be in the back of an awful lot of businesses' minds. And I'll tell you something else. I think that one of the ways that an organization can, to some extent, recover their position financially is by cutting their costs. One big cost that every business has got is space. If they decide they don't need space because they can adopt a more flexible, more remote working style to their business, then they're going to get rid of those offices, or they're going to repurpose those offices so that they are flexible working space. There won't be the ability to bring people back in the way they used to. So, Greg, I absolutely sympathise, and hopefully you've identified in both what Toni and I have said that training for middle management is a big issue. I think that's absolutely where it's centred. It's not training the directors, the owners of the company. They know it needs to be done. It's training the guys who supervise and review. and just changing an attitude, which is that if I'm a 35-year-old middle manager who's never had the ability to work from home or work flexibly, I could feel quite resentful about the fact that my 25-year-old charges are now being given that opportunity. Well, I'm sorry, but that's just the changing world. And you as the 35-year-old manager need to get with the program or frankly ship out. You need to find ways whereby you can develop your skills of communication and leadership and working with the leadership of the organization, help bring that performance level to where you need it to be by adopting new and different approaches. It's not just about doing what you were taught when you were an underling and when you were working for someone else.
Thank you for that.
I just want to add that it would be really useful to understand why the managers are so keen to go back to the office space. What are they missing? Can that be replaced by something else? What are the advantages of them going back to the office, and how can, if the company's approach is to not go back to the office as soon as possible, what can we replace what they're missing with it at the moment? Right now, actually, we had a survey, and surprisingly, a very low amount of people wanted to return to the office. With a large, we had an option to never return as well, because we want to hear what people were thinking, what are their current feelings about returning to the office. So a large portion of those people who wanted to stay working remotely wanted to never return to the office, which is, again, we have to understand why is this a choice. I mean, sometimes it's a personal thing, but it's really important for us to understand what works and what doesn't for people. So I would say it's really important for you at this point to understand why our managers are so keen to go back into the workplace.
Well, Liz sent us a question, and she says, what do you think is the greatest factor holding businesses back from creating a new normal? Is it finances, confidence, etc.? So you might want to take that, Toni, because it ties in very well with what you've said.
Can you repeat the first part of the question?
What do you think is the greatest factor holding businesses back from creating a new normal? Is it finances? Is it confidence? Maybe it's lack of understanding of what this new normal might mean.
Perhaps a set way of doing things, and just, again, breaking habits, but it's probably just a mixture of all, including inability sometimes to work remotely, depending on the role itself. Depending, more of the creative spaces do need people to be in the same, or at least sort of in similar vicinity, to look at different products together. So it really depends on the business. But I would say it's a mix of what you mentioned already. Financial constraints is actually a really interesting one that also Steve touched upon, but pretty much inability to adapt as quickly, fear of change, fear that things will never go back to normal as well, and inability to measure output. I think that would be a major issue for a lot of companies.
Thank you for that.
Can I answer just as well, because I've got an answer to that one as well, Andrea.
Of course.
The 3 C's. Is the answer. It's about confidence, courage, and clarity, I think. Clarity of where your market's going, what's going to happen in your business. Courage, as I was saying just now, to be more decisive, to be perhaps less collegiate, perhaps less coaching in your style, but more directional in your style, and the courage and the bravery to make those decisions, stand up as a leader and say, this is the direction in which we're going. And then a confidence to know that that's the right thing to do. So I think it's a combination of those things. A good friend of mine is a business advisor to 25 small and medium-sized businesses, and I got a stat from him the other day. I said to him, "How many businesses in your group, the 25 that you help?" He's a financial and business advisor to them. How many of those businesses are actively doing the things I've just described, having a clear view, forming a clear view of the future, acting decisively, and then having the confidence to see it through? And his statistic was rather depressing. It was about 20%, about 1 in 5 of them are actually doing that. And the other 80% of businesses are sitting back, allowing furlough and various schemes to continue to fund their business, sitting back and waiting to see where the needle comes back to. Does the needle come back to 80%, 60%, 40%, or 20%? And on the basis of that, looking to make decisions at that time. I mean, my message to those businesses would be that's too late, way too late. And if you're a leader, if you're an organization, you're in charge of an organization or even a team, you've got to be much more decisive, much clearer, and have much more confidence in your own judgment about where your business will be, and you have to act decisively. It's not a question of just waiting and seeing. Your business will die, and others more nimble than you will take your place, and you'll lose out altogether. So you have to be clear about the future, courageous about the decision making, and confident about the way in which you then implement those decisions.
Thank you. I'll stay with you, Steve. Equality, diversity, and inclusion have never been more prominent than today. How can we ensure that they stay at the top of the C-suite agenda, especially since corporates that tap into a more diverse talent pool stand so much to gain? And I mean, when we talk about a diverse talent pool, Astriid is at the core of that. Astriid is at the core of several discussions. You work with companies to advise them on recreating their HR strategies around the new workplace. So how can we keep that conversation going and make sure it's not just a conversation, but it's acted upon?
Well, one of the things that's going to change for us as a charity in those conversations is the narrative around the skills gap. So there was always an understanding and acceptance that there were a large number of people out there who were displaced, who were looking for work, who could come back and work on a part-time or short-term basis, job share basis. But what went with that was the skills gap. In February, there were 810,000 vacancies for skilled people in the UK. Now, I haven't seen the latest ONS figure, but we can be pretty certain that 810 has, if not completely, mostly disappeared. So the narrative will have to change from that, which was there's a skills gap, you're looking for people, yet you've got all this talent under your nose that you can't see, to one which says you've got all this talent under your nose which you can't see, but they are ready and willing and able to get involved in your organization. So if you're one of these companies that has now determined a new way forward, how can you employ some of those skills? And you know, a number of our candidates will be individuals who've got modest levels of skill, who've got modest levels of business experience, who are really quite young. But there are equally others in there who've got real business acumen and business experience, who may even have retired through ill health once, but feel able and willing to come back to the workplace. And bringing those people back in is something that I would say to those businesses now a social responsibility that they have. It's a responsibility to bring individuals back into companies who can bring that innovation and creativity, who can bring that life skill, that range of life skills to impact upon their businesses. And to bring those people back is a sensible business decision. You know, we've got a lovely story from a technology company that's been working with Astriid a couple of years. A guy, a lovely chap, Matt, took over the company and realized that his legal bill was spiraling. Every time he needed to draw up a contract, he needed to get an agency to provide a lawyer to understand the business, to create the contract, to implement it. And it just was going to kill the business. The cost of legal was going to kill the business. He turned to Astriid. He found a lawyer whom he had not met personally, who was living at the other end of the country, who was able to connect with his business, understand it once, get the training and education once, and then deliver a contract which could be refined by him several times over because he understood the organization. And the business benefited to the tune of an 80% saving in their legal expenses. Now, business sense and business acumen should mean that diversity, inclusion, equality is something that's higher on the business agenda even than it is already. And the more you can bring people in with those experiences, the more benefit you're going to get.
May I just add on to that as well?
Well, I have the same question for you, Toni, so please.
Yeah, this is just more to my fellow HR practitioners as well. I know sometimes it's really difficult to either be part of this conversation about diversity and inclusion, and or sometimes it's more difficult to open up that conversation in the company that you're in. I just want to say that there are plenty of companies out there, plenty of partners and diversity and inclusion organizations that help with that, help HR practitioners who are typically the gatekeepers to making sure that you get to work with this type of partners as well. They educate you on how to open the conversation, so it's not just another tick box exercise. They help you prepare a business case as well. That is obviously shared with the team. They help you educate leaders. They help you even write job descriptions in a way that is not discriminatory, or it's all inclusive as well. So it's really key as well. This is key part of making sure that you attract diverse talent. And there are plenty of partners. If you don't know where to start, if you don't know how to start, if you don't want to just open up a conversation for the sake of opening up a conversation, if you're genuinely passionate about this, there are plenty of partners out there who can help you as well. similar to what Steve is doing as well, but there are materials and people out there who can help and educate people within the company as well.
So are the HR people the enforcers? Are they the ones that should make sure that ED&I stays at the top of the agenda and it turns into action?
Not necessarily. It would be good if this is not just an HR point, and this is something that is always brought by HR people in discussions. It would be good that there is buy-in from the entire team, and it's even better when it comes from leadership. That's best way forward. However, more often than not, HR practitioners are the enablers of change in terms of discussing these topics and making sure that the programs introduced and initiatives that happen. More often than not, I can't speak on behalf of every HR practitioner, but no, more often than not, we have to make sure that we have enough knowledge about this, and we don't. And it's great that there's enough information out there and great knowledge bases out there to educate ourselves first, prepare the business cases, roll out the initiatives, work with partners on a long-term basis. It's actually really important that we set a really strong foundation, so we can build up on whatever we've built on that foundation already. So it's really important for me that there are aspects of HR workflows that I didn't even realize I could twist and tweak to make sure that they're more inclusive and make sure that the communication is more clear and it's more intentional in terms of diversity and inclusion. So there is a lot more there for us to learn, and it's good that there are people who can help us.
Thank you. Moving a little bit into the employee engagement side, because that's been quite difficult, hasn't it? From the water cooler conversation and beers after work to beers over Zoom or tea over Zoom, while kids are running around, behind the parents. So it's become slightly different, hasn't it? How can corporates continue to engage with their employees and ensure their well-being in these unprecedented times? Can I ask Steve that he answer first?
Sure, and I think my answer is probably very simple, and that's around communication. I think, and back to Greg's question and the point about middle management training and understanding of how you do this, but I think the conversation between employees and employers needs to increase, not decrease. There needs to be a comfort on both sides, a comfort that comes from an understanding, that comes from training and a framework perhaps, that means that employees are comfortable describing their situation, and whether that's a descent into a health issue, a mental health issue perhaps, but employees feel comfortable discussing it, and employers expect that to be talked about, expect that conversation, and expect to be able to be responsible for responding, for contributing to it. So they want their employees to perform at their best. And so there's benefits for the company as well in having that conversation. And just developing your skills such that you're able to, very persistent man at the door now, all sorts of distractions like you get from working from home. But they can do more than just provide car parking spaces. They can do more than shift patterns, changing shift patterns. They can do more than giving people more holiday and so on. There's a lot more they can do, and they need to be prepared to do it. And now I need to just answer my door if you don't excuse me a sec.
No worries, no worries. Shall we quickly move to Toni with the same question and then maybe go back to Steve?
Of course, I just wanted to follow up on what he said in terms of communication. From my point of view, just opening up as many avenues to engage with employees as possible, whether it's HR, manager, team meetings, all hands, anything that is to do with communication. And obviously constant communication is something that is quite good, but also it's important for us to spot trends. What has worked in the past month may not work this month, so it's really important that we act on that. We listen to the insight that people have given us, and what we found is that people are more open to answer questions now than ever before. So they're really happy, well, not happy, but really willing to participate in the surveys that we send, and making sure that we model our approach together.
Steve, did you want to add anything, please?
Yeah, just to say that I think that from the employees' perspective, I think just remembering your worth, remembering your value is really important. that you have a value, you have aspirations, you have experience, you have things to offer the organization. As I say, the organization doesn't want you to fail, they want you to succeed because it's better for them anyway. But thinking about how your strengths apply to the organization, how you can use those strengths. You're not alone in asking for help. You won't be alone in having difficulty at this time. Everyone will be suffering to some extent or another. So having the ability to be able to ask, to have that conversation, and then to make sure that you are thinking about what you want and what you're looking for. And and if this organization is not one that can give it to you, if this is an organization that doesn't seem to be responsive to the needs that you've got, well, take responsibility yourself for thinking about other places that you can work. And if that involves your own version of a new normal, your own version of a pivoting to somewhere else, take some time out to have a think about what it is you really want to do. Where do your passions lie? Where do your strengths lie? What transferable skills have you got? Create a new normal for yourself, and then start to think about how you can get help to find those different types of roles. And being responsible, taking responsibility, and feeling less helpless is a big part of addressing some of the mental health issues that people have. It's those people who've been on furlough, who don't know when that's going to end, who don't know whether if it's going to end, and whether they'll have a job at the end of it, who I imagine are feeling some of the greatest pressures when it comes to controlling their anxiety and stress. If you take responsibility, you identify what it is that you want to do and the direction you want to go, then you're going to find yourself with better opportunities that are available in the marketplace.
Toni, did you want to add anything else, or should I go into a question we have from one of our attendees?
Oh, yeah, we can go to that question.
Okay, Alex has asked, what are the main changes that you've seen when it comes to employee engagement in the new normal?
Maybe I can start by just repeating what I said before. We have noticed an increased amount of answers to our surveys. So people like to answer more of the questions that we felt they were a little bit more uncomfortable to answer before. So that is really positive for us, because then we're receiving fantastic insight. This is quite useful for us. We have found that people are organizing themselves in terms of what are they missing and how can we replace that feeling. So whether it would be the pub quizzes or on Zoom, I know we've all had enough of those, but it would be something as simple as making sure that there is a daily stand-up and no one is missed out. And if someone is missed out, then there is a brief of the meeting sent out in email, so no one feels left out. So we have found a lot of Steve said kindness coming out of this. So the engagement came from employees themselves sometimes, but more often than not, we saw that everyone kind of was mobilized, even though the anxieties about job security and everything that is going on right now is absolutely the same across industries. And I mean, it's more intense in some industries than other, but people go to their peers, people go to their managers, people go to HR or someone outside of the company to seek clarity and comfort. And it's really good to see that in a situation like this, a lot of people came to, I say us as an employer, but that's how I feel as well. It was really, really reassuring that people are, it's very similar to what Steve is saying, are taking responsibility to make sure that we get through this together and that we can make this work.
Okay, so maybe to summarize that, people want to be heard a lot more than before, and they're more likely to actually engage with the company in this new normal. Very interesting. There's a question here that I think is very good for Steve, because I think it ties into something you said earlier from Laura. Is now the right time to look for new opportunities? What do you think matters more to HR and hiring managers when they look for a candidate? And I think it probably ties into what you said, Steve. If a company doesn't share your values, then maybe it's not the right place for you.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time to take a personal view, a personal audit of where you stand. You know, what are your strengths? What are your passions? What are the things you want to do? I've spent some of my life being involved in teaching vision to people and helping people, young and old, to establish a personal vision for themselves, just as you might do for an organization. And I think a big part of that is to address that question: where are my strengths? Where are my interests? And most particularly, where are my passions? What are the things that I'm really passionate about? And if you can go through an exercise where, and it's structured, semi-structured exercise, to answer those questions, put a timeline, put a future date on that expectation, and then create a picture and an image in your mind which you can feel proud of, and you feel as if it's going to deliver for you what it is you want from your working life and your social, family, health, wealth life as well. If you can do that and then stand at that point and look back at the current time, then that's an easier way, looking back from the future to the current, to see a path, a journey, a ladder, as I would tend to call it, between where you stand today and where you want to be. So there are exercises in doing that. So I would say, yes, it is. I think that that if you want to sit back, a bit like those organizations I was citing that I guess I'm quite critical of, the 80% that are sitting back to wait and see where their needle comes back to. I think if you do that as an individual, I can imagine the stress, the anxiety, the pain that causes is enormous. Taking responsibility and recognizing that you're not in the right place, you do need to be doing something different. No, there aren't going to be heaps of jobs out there at the moment. There's that's a very different situation to what we've had before. But depending on the speed at which we recover, these organizations that are having to pivot and change and go in a different direction are going to require different people and different experiences. If your experience, Laura, happens to be summarized in an effective CV and described in a way that's relevant to those businesses, you will find them and they will find you. But it's I think it's an opportunity for you to do the same sort of visioning for yourself as the organizations are being asked to do as well.
Wonderful, thank you. And the next question from Patricia, I think is great for both of you. Do you think that COVID and the new life challenges it has brought with it has shifted companies and people's priorities, i.e. mental health, performance? Therefore, shouldn't even more jobs be created to educate and support companies develop the skills to support employees working from home using the invisible talent pool? Chronic illness has forced some to work from home permanently. They are experts, they can be used and are passionate.
Well, Patricia should probably come and work with us in the charity, because that's exactly the sort of thing that we would say. You know, we've got that talent pool, we've got that group of people who are available, ready, willing to work. I mean, they of course have been hugely pressured by COVID as well. Let's not forget that many of them will be in that group of 2.2 million people who are shielding and are not able to leave home. They're not all people over 80 by any means. There are a lot of younger people in that list as well. And those people are looking for an opportunity to get back to work, but they've got bags of energy, bags of enthusiasm. They just need help to focus it and place it in the right direction. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk about Brexit and how Brexit was going to reduce the number of people available to work in this country. And those ONS figures I was quoting, 810,000 in February, the numbers were going up and up and up, more and more people, skilled people looking for jobs, and more jobs unfilled. Of course, Brexit is still on the horizon, but I don't think people are worried about there not being enough employees anymore. There's going to be more than enough. And if you consider the invisible talent pool, the community of people with the skills that Patricia's describing, then yeah, there's absolutely enough to do all the jobs that could ever be created.
Quick question for you, Toni. How can we adjust our HR KPIs to the new normal?
Again, very much aligned to the overall business strategy as well. Very similar to what Steve was saying, you have to understand how the business is going to go ahead and what are the short and long-term plans as well, and what are the contingency plans. So I would say recruitment, very, it's a fact. There'll still be a skills shortage in certain areas. It's just a matter of how it is, and it's important that we start the talent pipeline building from now. The recruitment KPIs will not change. There'll be more KPIs around diversity and inclusion as well. There'll be more KPIs about well-being and how our employees score our scores on a net promoter score as well. There'll be more KPIs in terms of turnover. There'll be more KPIs of, I think, around how creative we are in terms of job sharing, how we measure output, how we measure performance. So I think these are the KPIs that will change a little bit, not in every industry, of course.
And just to add to that point that Toni's made, the government has a target before COVID of getting 1 million more people with disability into work. that will be a target that will become, I think, equality, diversity, and inclusion will become a bigger factor, not a smaller factor after COVID, not least of all because there'll be an awful lot more people affected. I think that 1 million target may well even be increased. And I think every business needs to take its share and responsibility for bringing people with disability back to work again.
Okay, and my final question for Steve. You work with people with long-term health issues. They have a lot of experience when it comes to working in isolation and staying productive, because that has been a problem that's been raised over the last 3 months by people who are not used to this new normal. What are the things we can learn from managing our own productivity or that of our employees from those who have experience in this space?
Yeah, good. I think that the sorts of things that people who we represent in the charity, the sort of experiences they have will be very similar to the experiences people have had now through COVID, people without illness. So it's about a lack of structure, it's about negative emotions, it's about isolation and quietness and loneliness that goes with it, feeling trapped, feeling claustrophobic. It's those sorts of issues. And the one we just talked about, feeling a bit purposeless, feeling a bit stuck, a bit helpless in the situation you're in. So there are a whole series of really of simple but powerful pieces of advice that are available from people in our community that we can make available. And through the Workplace Today magazine, I think we can absolutely make available to people who want to know the answer to that. It's in terms of structure, it's about having formal schedules, schedule for sleep, schedule for work, around having formal methods for communication, so that you've got a routine that you can establish, routine that's got some flexibility in it, but allows you scope to do the things that are unexpected, that come up and are a surprise. Breaking down the big tasks into smaller tasks so that you can manage them during the course of a day and taking them on over a weekly schedule. But most importantly, managing your health. And that would be the thing that's paramount to people who are perhaps housebound or perhaps have a long-term health condition, which means they can't get out very often. It's about managing their health, managing their energy, and using the flow that they are in at times. And it can be very odd times. It could be middle of the night times. It could be weekend times. But using the flow they've got to get the things done that they need to do. And so back to the very beginning when Toni was talking about, it's not about bums on seats and presenteeism. Exactly the case, that if you can get a job done, does it really matter that this individual is doing it from home, working remotely in the middle of a Saturday night because they just happen to be up because their medication has kicked in and they can't sleep? You're giving them something that they can do, something that they can focus on. There's no distractions. The phone doesn't ring. Consequently, you get a better quality output.
Thank you for that. We have run out of time. It happens when you have very interesting conversations. I've had Steve Schutt, CEO of Astriid, and Toni Georgieva, HR expert, with me discussing the new workplace. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you to our attendees too. You will find a number of articles based on this webinar in our magazine, Workplace Today, at workplacetoday.co.uk, and in our newsletters. Until next time, thank you and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.